There will be enhanced security at the mall in Minneapolis. That is the focus of that video, seen and unseen. In response to earlier calls, we've ramped up the Federal Protective Service at federal buildings around the country. But this most recent release is emblematic of a new phase that we're in. And so doing things here in the homeland has become critical to deal with this new global terrorist threat that we face.
What America does affects the rest of the world. And in the battle against ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and other international terror killers, fair to say we have not been at our best in tamping down the fight. And that can only make things worse for our allies and those who need to step up and fight for themselves. Our guest has over 30 years' experience in the Middle East as a former United Kingdom ambassador. He was the first consul general in northern Iraq since the 50s, based in Kirkuk. Now advisor to the CEO of Babcock International Group on the Middle East and North Africa. Let's welcome Noel Guckian to MidPoint. Noel, thank you so much for being here today.
Good afternoon, Ed. Rather good morning to you in Florida, probably.
Good morning. Well, you're close enough. We're right on the cusp there. We get to our lunch break here, so you're right there on the edge, Noel. Perfect timing. Let's get down to what exactly, first of all, the United States is doing and how it affects our allies and how it affects the people who are even closer to ISIS and to Al-Qaeda and the rest. First of all, the Mosul war plan here. The Pentagon has announced exactly what they're going to do. American senators here like John McCain and Lindsey Graham have just slammed this, but the Pentagon says we want to avoid a massive, bloody battle in the second largest city in Iraq. Do you go with that? Do you think this was a good idea to basically telegraph what you're doing?
Well, Ed, I think you've got to accept that it was on the cards to happen soon. Back in June, when ISIS came out of nowhere almost and captured Mosul almost without a fight, and the Iraqi army disappeared, and it was left to the Kurdish Peshmerga to hold the line north of Mosul. And so I think what they're saying is basically stating the obvious. Now, what the Americans have done with their airstrikes is that they have stopped the advance of ISIS in both Syria and Iraq. And after all, let's face it, ISIS was on the 10, 15 kilometers from Baghdad International Airport. So it was always going to happen. There is no appetite here, I don't think, in the United Kingdom for another land war after the Iraq and the Afghan war, and we're still waiting for the inquiry into the Iraq war to come out, which will be after the next general elections here. But it was interesting to see that about 4 weeks ago, the Defence Select Committee of our Parliament, our House of Commons, said that we weren't doing enough. And I would tend to agree with that. We need to do more. But what that more is will be decided in London.
No, let me get to this with 2 minutes left before we take a break, come back and talk more. What is the perception of the people in the United Kingdom as to what America is doing or is not doing to try and stem the tide of these killers?
Well, I think there is a general acceptance that you, the Americans, have stopped the tide. You held them back at Kobani with Kurdish forces and Syrian Kurdish forces. You and the British and Arab allies have stemmed the tide of the ISIS fighters going north of Mosul and indeed into Kirkuk. So without the airstrikes, they would have been in a much stronger position in Iraq and indeed in Syria.
Do the people there want America to get more involved, put the boots on the ground? Because I would imagine possibly even in the United Kingdom, there's not a lot of appetite for having men and women on the ground who may then give their lives for another country.
Look, it's becoming very much a domestic issue here, but we don't really want boots on the ground this time around. Helping the Iraqi army, the Peshmerga fighters, and others, and with air power, is probably the limit of what we would do, and we'd expect our American allies to do as well.
We are expecting an awful lot from both sides. Hang tight just a couple of moments here. We'll be right back, breaking back. We're going to focus on the latest threat against America from ISIS. We mentioned that here at the beginning of the segment about what is happening with regard to a threat against American shopping malls. But we also should point out it is against Canada and the United Kingdom. Also, how the world needs to deal with the constant bombardment of propaganda and what exactly this might entail next from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Stay with us. We'll continue right here on MidPoint. Let's welcome back to MidPoint former British Middle Eastern ambassador and the only British diplomat to be honored by the U.S. State Department Tribute of Appreciation under Condoleezza Rice. Noel Guckian joins us once again. Noel, let me get down to this whole issue about ISIS now going after malls in 3 different places, Canada, America, and even at the Westfield Mall in Stratford, England right now. There's an interesting thought here. Is ISIS perhaps just using this to perhaps make the general public more aware of Muslims, perhaps more propaganda, make them more biased against Muslims in their own area, just to create that sort of furor and that sort of propaganda, because it becomes insidious, and that works even better than a bomb sometimes?
Well, there are many questions there. I think also malls in France were also suggested, and of course we've had terror outrages in both Copenhagen and Paris. We've had, of course, the July 2005 attacks in London, and we had the attacks on a single soldier a couple of years ago in London, and of course 9/11. Now, whenever I gave lectures while I was ambassador to, say, the staff colleges of some of the countries I was posted to, I would talk about Al-Qaeda as a franchise. I think ISIS, and I never give it the dignity of the name IS or Daesh, ISIS has been able to manipulate social media, the internet, beyond the dreams of anybody before. And all of this allows people to establish themselves as, we are part of IS. Now, we had the outrage against the 21 Egyptian Coptic Christians in Libya 2 weeks ago, but we've had many, many more elsewhere. Now, these are targeted at Western targets, especially the United States, Canada, the US, and Western Europe. But it is also a way of saying, well, there are people who support IS, and we will allow them to behave as they want to behave, which I don't know where the answer is to stop them. Now, the first item on the British news at the moment is the disappearance of 3 British Muslim schoolgirls from school who have traveled to Turkey, and the assumption is they're trying to head into Syria to join IS. And this is happening right across Europe, where there are substantial Muslim communities. 90% are totally integrated within our societies, but there are some that have gone one way or the other.
But it would seem to be literally impossible, whether it's America, Canada, or what even you're describing in the United Kingdom, to come to some sort of resolution on how to attack this enemy. Because you can social media yourself to death, you can get out there, you can tweet, you can put it on Facebook, but it seems as if there will always be a facet of the society, the 3 young girls you talk about, who will be completely ready to go. You won't be able to stop them. So it almost seems as if you can't focus on that. You've got to focus more on what goes on the homeland soil.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a question of integration, while accepting the fact that we in the United Kingdom are now a multicultural society.
Are you too multicultural, though? I mean, is that multiculturalism here, doesn't that still seems to chafe at a lot of people, because there are those saying that still those different cultures do not and have not been forced to assimilate into British culture?
Yeah, but most have, and we respect religion, but we also insist that they respect the law of the land, and the vast majority of people do so. There is this small group that doesn't. Now, if I could very briefly recount a story from...
I have about 60 seconds left, Noel.
Yeah, okay. Mohammed al-Sharif, who is the head of the World Islamic Call Society, who has posted in Libya twice, but this is in '98, told me bringing in prayer leaders from outside the United Kingdom or Europe was wrong because it turned people into fanatics or they turned against religion. And they didn't want either. And that's why they supported something called the Ealing College, which was to teach prayer leaders. And that's where everything has to be brought to the core, to respect the fact that Europe is a secular society. And within that, people are allowed religious freedoms and freedom of speech, but we are still a secular society.
Do those educators and those prayer leaders want to learn a different way to teach?
Well, the three girls that disappeared last week during our half-term holiday came from a great school in East London, which was given the highest standards and total recognition that they were not radicalized at school. They were radicalized by their friends and on social media.
There you go. We're going to have to stop it there because we are all out of time. Ambassador Noel Guckian, we thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful day. We'll look forward to speaking again.
Well, thank you very much, Ed. Have a nice day.
Take care. ISIS is coming to Italy, and you might be surprised to see how the Italians themselves are reacting to the possibility. We'll show you, tell you, talk about it when we come back right here on MidPoint.